On a crisp autumn morning in the late 1950s, a young boy knelt by the edge of Jenny Creek, holding a tin drinking cup. He was thirsty, but the water was so packed with dark, single-minded salmon pressing upstream to spawn that he had to hunt for a patch of open water just to fill the cup. While his father hunted deer on the basalt ridges above, his mother walked the drainages with the children. Later, she would take the tanned deer hide from the hunt and sew mitten covers for them to wear in the winter. To that boy, this abundance was the baseline, a world full of fish, and a family using what the landscape provided was simply how the world functioned then. But the farm sitting next to their camp was already empty. The entire valley had been condemned, slated to disappear under the reservoir of a massive new project called Iron Gate Dam. The engineers of the mid-20th century looked at a wild river running to the Pacific and saw an unbuilt machine. To them, unharvested water was power going to waste. This philosophy justified pouring millions of tons of concrete across the Klamath, the Columbia, and the Snake, converting living watersheds into controllable kilowatts. It was the logic of the finished frontier. The goal was to take the raw materials of nature and put them to work permanently. Decades later, that boy, now a grown man, returned to float the Klamath River with his mother and sister. They drifted into the flat, still water of Iron Gate Reservoir and looked down. Beneath the hole, under 200 feet of impounded water, sat their old camp, the creek, the farm, and the gravel beds where the salmon once spawned. His mother passed away before she could ever see that canyon freed from the lake. That submerged camp was a microscopic fraction of the toll. Across the West, the era of megadams resulted in a permanent erasure of cultural history and biological life. The builders were driven by a genuine faith in progress. They believed that by damming the rivers, they were building a more secure, modern America. The benefits were real. Hydroelectric turbines powered wartime aluminum smelters and lit up rural homes. Federally supplied water turned hundreds of thousands of acres of desert into irrigated farmland. There was also the threat of the river itself. In 1948, a swollen Columbia erases the city of Vanport, Oregon, in a single day. Dams were the tools used to tame that violence. Early on, the population science was thin. Few of the people pouring the concrete fully understood what a stagnant reservoir would do to a migratory fish run over 80 years. At the time, damming the river looked like a noble, necessary sacrifice for human prosperity. But the reasoning changed as the science of ecological collapse became undeniable. Indifference took over, even as native treaties were bypassed and the salmon numbers plummeted. An economic flaw emerged. Cheap power benefited private utilities and industrial agriculture, but the bill for the dying river was handed to the public. Utilities defended these profits long after reservoirs turned toxic. The system was rigged. Benefits stayed private, losses remained socialized. By the end, the era of dam building had corrupted into a system of greed, where the people reaping the highest rewards paid none of the true costs. By 2024, the arithmetic finally shifted. Facing modern environmental standards, utility companies realized that repairing their aging dams was more expensive than tearing them down. This economic tipping point was met by a moral one. The native nations of the Klamath had spent decades leading a ferocious campaign to restore the river's life. In 2024, the excavators arrived. Over a single summer, they dismantled 4 massive dams, executing the largest dam removal project in world history. The response was immediate. Sonar monitoring equipment detected fall-run Chinook salmon pushing past the former dam sites in a matter of weeks. This immediate return of the fish challenged the core assumption of the dam-building era. The river's biological memory was far more resilient than the concrete had been. This means the story ends with a third generation. The host's granddaughter will soon be able to visit that old campsite. The lake is gone. She will stand on freed ground and watch the salmon return to gravel beds sealed off for 60 years. She will see the legacy of her great-grandmother, who lived in balance with the landscape, outlast the era of the engineers who tried to dominate it. If a river can begin its own recovery this quickly, what were the dams ever for? And what do we owe the living world next?